Wait a minute, that's not a survival knife. Folks, welcome to the channel. And in this case, addressing that question, what is a survival knife or not? Now, this is something that I got from a comment a while back in one of my videos. Someone was, I think it was commenting on a video I did about this knife, which is currently my EDC folder. Of course, I have a bunch of folding knives, but this is the one I've been carrying most lately. And someone was commenting there, oh, that's not a survival knife. That's no good for surviving in the wilderness. You need a wilderness survival knife, so as to have a survival knife. And that's the point where you go, okay, people that have no clue what they're talking about, but there's also a lot of folks that listen to these people simply because of how sure they seem to be about themselves. They will look at you and say, that's not a survival knife. That's a M9 bayonet. It's no good as a survival knife. Okay, all right, let's take that into account. But usually these people have this philosophy of it's going to be more about the wilderness survival. I think this person specifically said that that's an urban survival knife. It's not a real survival knife so as to live in the wild. First thing that comes in mind whenever I see that argument or that excuse is, dude, how often are you surviving really in the middle of the jungle? I mean, it's so rare that you probably end up making it to the headlines and news around the world if you ever find yourself in that specific condition. It is that rare. Now, people getting stabbed, fighting, and defending themselves with knives, or having to, poke at stuff or pry, that happens all day long. In fact, maybe one of the more realistic uses for a blade these days is actually having to use it to defend yourself. And here's where people start accusing you, oh, you're just a delusional Rambo wannabe or nonsense like that. It's really not the case. It's just about honestly assessing how likely are you to need your bushcraft survival knife to survive in any condition whatsoever. And classic bushcraft knife for a lot of people will be your Mora. You can throw a dead cat at a bunch of bushcrafters and 90% of them will tell you, get started with your Mora. A Mora is all you'll ever need. A Mora is a great bushcraft knife. A Mora is a great survival knife if you ever have to use it. Well, it's a great knife in general. I mean, if I'm lost in the middle of the damn Amazon jungle and I have nothing more than my Mora, I'll be glad I have it. Maybe would I be even happier if I had my own survival knife designed by myself? Of course I would. I think this is a better survival knife. That's why I designed it that specific way. Full tang knife, pretty thick ass blade, cuts like hell, and you have recurve blade that gives me a good amount of weight in the tips so as to have better chopping than you have any rights with a 7 or 8 inch blade. That's why I go with a specific design, and that's where arguably it will be a better survival knife than your little Mora with a Scandi grind. This is great for carving wood, for cutting things. Yeah, for little cutting tasks, this is perfectly adequate. Now, I can cut as much with that knife over there and it will do that okay. This will be even better because of that specific grind. Now, this grind doesn't lend itself as good so as to more abusive conditions where you're pushing that knife into that. It's going to be a little bit of shoveling. It's going to be a little bit of an axe. It's going to be a little bit of a pry bar. It's going to be a little bit of hatching, prying, poking, and smashing, hammering stuff, right? All of those things which I believe you're likely to encounter in a real survival situation rather than just having a purely cutting blade. That's great, but it's very much that thing that it does well. And for people that are into these primitive survival skills, what we now call bushcrafting, yes, this does it. But keep in mind, those same people would have either bigger knives, or they would have some kind of flint hatchet or axe, some big ass rock to smash through stuff. And of course they would have loved to have something that had a great edge and was very light and nimble and fast in the hand, but doesn't mean that, at least the way I see it, makes a best ever survival knife. And the same goes for the pocket aspect of things. Now, a lot of people know that Victorinox is your classic of classics when it comes to camping, Boy Scouts, stuff like that. This has become as classic as it gets, right? Victorinox is like it just brings all of that to mind. And it is a great knife. It's a great little pocket knife. Cuts very well. Has a very proven blade geometry. Now, is this the best survival knife that I could have in my pocket? Yeah, of course not. And in fact, you just have to look at some of the other options, including by Victorinox themselves, to see that's not the case. Personally, at least for me, I would want to have, in a survival knife, I want to have a strong blade, something that is much stronger than this. Nice, cuts very well, and if you're careful enough, it will last you a lifetime and more, but I'd rather have a stronger blade. I'd rather have something that locks, by God, of course. That's one of the key aspects that I definitely want to have in a survival folder, right? I want a strong, thick blade that cuts well, but can take a little bit of abuse, locking mechanism that is, secure enough, and while I'm at it, I want to have a one-hand opening mechanism and a pocket clip. In fact, Victorinox obviously sees this as well. That's why for their soldier knife, they have, well, not the clip, which I think that some models do have, some different models, but you have a one-hand opening blade, locks into place, and you have a little bit of a thicker, stronger blade. Now, is this the best survival knife? Of course not, at least not the way I see it. You have better options, and the thing is, you have so many options that it becomes a matter of taste. What is it I like? And when you get to these things, objectively speaking, there are certain things that you can see as, for example, this one, the CRKT M16 model, law enforcement model. I think this is one of those objectively, yeah, it does a bunch of things. I have the glass breaker, I have the seatbelt cutter, I have my clip, my one-hand opening flipper thing, right? I have a Tanto blade that is known to be very strong on that tip and penetrates and punches through stuff very nicely. And I even have this, which personally for me, I'd rather not have this because I know how to sharpen a knife, and this is more intended for people that, for law enforcement, for your typical cop that has no damn idea on how to sharpen a blade. He will still have some teeth to cut through stuff if the blade ends up being dull, and he still needs something to just, power through and just cut through crap that needs to be cut. I see this also as a great protection for your finger, which comes in nicely, and even this would catch anything that's slicing and about to cut my finger. So the way I see it, this objectively is one of the more designly, in terms of the design, is one of the more sound survival knives in general. Oh no, you're such an idiot. This is much better because look at this blade. This will slice through wood and vegetation much better. Yeah, sure. Realistically, I'm a lot less likely to need that for real survival than needing something like this. That's at least the way not only I see it, but what basically numbers say. It is very rare that someone ends up having to do long-term wilderness survival, realistically. You have different variations of this same knife, which I've shown previously in other videos. Something like this. This is more of a practical survival blade. Instead of having a thin blade, full flat, almost all the way, and in fact all the way through, you have that clip point, which does a little bit better of that, skinning and cutting and getting into little details. This is more of a powering through crap. But yeah, I think that in general, when you look at folders, that's what you want. You want a strong, certain size blade, but you can even make the case for something like this being a great survival folding knife, much better than this one for sure. You have one hand opening, locking, strong blade. It's not really all that long, but when it comes to pocket knives, usually in survival, it's not that much of a big deal. In fact, it's often the case that you may want something like, if I have to pry, I probably want to have something like this rather than this one, which gives me a little bit more of a length if I ever need this for, fighting and that sort of thing. But for prying, the shorter, a little bit more of a stout, thick blade probably works a little bit better. Now, these are all excellent knives. All of these could be excellent knives and will be more than welcomed in survival situations. Some simply do certain things better than others. Some may be better at slicing, cutting, poking, drilling holes into things that need them, and so on. Some are a little bit more utilitarian, like this one. But you kind of see where I'm going with this here. But this idea of, but that's not a survival knife. Yeah, man, it's that's kind of like your call. But when it comes down to people that know what they're talking about, mostly we do end up agreeing on certain things working well for certain tasks. Again, this bushcrafting, all of that sort of stuff, yeah, works great. I will pick this for that thing all day long. Survival, at least for me, this is kind of what I want to end up with as my go-to do everything survival knife. I perfectly see why, and the aircrew egress survival knife made by the U.S. military is really not all that different from this one made by Frobis. It's a short clip point blade with a little bit of a saw there in the back. I think it was originally intended to cut through the fuselage of airplanes if they're downed. But yeah, it's a classic survival knife. This blade geometry is one of the more classic survival knife blade geometries you have. Maybe one of the most beloved ones, the K-bar, which lately with all of this YouTube thing, it seems to go into a lot of questioning, which is, in my opinion, undeserved. Of course, you will see so many videos of people bending the tang of this knife and even breaking it. That does not take away from how well the blade geometry work. The tang, we can talk about that. But the blade geometry, this is super sound. And it is because the K-bar itself comes from a design that was based on a hunting knife that soldiers themselves were buying off the rack and taking along. And when it came down to designing this knife, that was basically almost copied in terms of the blade geometry. So it's more of a hunting knife, more of a hunting, skinning, outdoors knife than an actual tactical blade. Maybe the evolution of this into a true battlefield knife is very much copying what you have in the Glock. And the Glock did not invent anything new themselves. This comes from a long line of narrow, strong blades. A little bit of a dagger, a little bit of a prying tool, a lot of a fighting survival tool. Is it as good for bushcrafting as your Mora? No, of course it's not, and it's not going to be cutting as well, and in fact it's going to be even holding an edge less than your Mora, but it is intended for this kind of thing mostly, and this kind of thing. Opening boxes, maybe needed as fighting. In fact, this is intended as a bayonet knife, so it's intended to go on the end of a gun and stab an enemy soldier, right? But you can put a somewhat decent edge on it with a little bit of your own work, and it will cut perfectly fine. For most of the, for all of the obsessiveness regarding wilderness survival and bushcrafting, for any real wilderness survival need that you may have, if you have a decent enough edge on this thing, it will do just fine. And given how easy it is to sharpen, you can sharpen it with pretty much any stone that you find almost just as well, and it will keep doing and cutting just fine. All right, so all of these things regarding, that's not exactly a survival knife, well, depends what you're looking at, and don't let yourself get tricked by these these people that come along and tell you what you should have or not have as a survival knife. You do have, fortunately enough, you do have enough information online explaining these things. Is it a bigger knife better? Of course it is. I'm pretty much more of a bigger knife myself. I would rather have a bigger knife than the one I designed myself, right? But the truth is that if you're designing a knife for the general public, the reality is that the great majority of people, and I include myself, if you're going out on a walk, you don't want to have a 12-inch blade. You don't want to have a short machete, which would be better in general as a survival knife. If I want to go light, I will go, honestly, with either the Glock or my own knife, which fits in some of the smaller little bags that I could take along with me without really losing a whole lot in terms of capability. I'm pretty sure something like this will do most of the things I need a survival knife to do for me. All right, guys. So basically, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video and got a little bit of food for thought there in terms of what is it that you need or not or don't need. As I've said so many times before, realistically, in the modern age that we live in, no matter where you live, even if you live out in out of town or in the city or the suburbs, really, most cases, a multi-tool will do most of the things that you need a blade for, including some of these things that may be required when out in the sticks and cutting some vegetation and so on. Okay, that's going to be all for now, folks. See you in the next video. Take care.